needs to be a bit more interactive, and he'd like to get a few more ideas coming through. So in terms of thinking around everybody he could, or potential people who could actually try and make this a more of an interactive conference, he thought about all sorts of different people, and then he came across one fellow. I won't say it was the last resort, but it could have been. Jamie Fitzgerald. Now, some of you will know Jamie, and so it's my privilege to be able to introduce him to you to get the ball rolling, and he'll deal with some of the bits and pieces to keep the conference running. So Jamie's been known to a lot of you. I think he's been involved with the conference before, but he's a guy who started a career as a fencer, and he got bored with fencing, wanted to row the Atlantic. So by the time you've read that part through his CV, you think this guy is nuts. But anyway, so having achieved those major events, you can understand why his planning is a big part of his, and leadership is a big part of the way he operates. And so you can see why he's developed into the role that he has now. And he's heads an organisation called Inspiring Performance. He's chief executive of that, and he's involved in all sorts of organisations. So the words that, you've got to describe them, what he does, he's very effective at setting goals. He takes a leadership role. He's a great communicator. He's a performer. He's an adventurer, strategic thinker, tactics. What do all those words mean? I don't know. Let Jamie tell us. Jamie, welcome.
Jingoes, Ian, that's a bit of pressure. The funny thing about some of those adventures is that not that many people choose to do them, so it kind of sounds special, but actually that's pretty isolated out there. Good morning, everyone. Ina mana, ina reo e reo rangatira, tēnā koutou, good morning. That's code for all of you leaders, all of you wonderful people from around the country. Welcome to Wellington. I'm a proud Wellingtonian, so we've organised some decent weather for you. There were a couple of you that came in yesterday, though, and there was a meeting among some of you, and I don't think many people had much for morning tea because I felt a bit queasy from the landing. But anyway, so we've got a pretty jam-packed couple of days for you. The theme, thank you for the introduction, Ian, we've got the theme around reflections and directions. And if you think about what that means, so I thought for some fun today, how about we time it? And Justin, I think you've got your phone ready. So Justin can be there on the ready. So let's kind of get through it. So first of all, just in terms of timings, I've got a couple of things up on the screen. So we've got a couple of breaks this afternoon. We're going to have lunch at 12 o'clock and then a break again at 3 p.m. Just in terms of some of the areas that we have to work around the conference, obviously there'll be a chunk of stuff being shared here. But for those of you that had some morning tea, that was upstairs in the Mokopuna and Matiu rooms. Now, many of you were in just one of the rooms with the sponsors and suppliers having your bite to eat, but bear in mind there's a second room which is adjacent to it, so there was plenty of tucker in there. Make sure that you have a look through it as well. So there's two rooms, we don't have to be all jam-packed. But speaking of sponsors and suppliers, so I think before we get any further, let's thank those who have helped make the conference happen and all their support, so thank you very much. Just one in particular, one of the team up there. There's the Gallagher guys. Now, if you're not aware, they've brought along a special bit of kit. It's I don't know how many of these we've got on the farm. These TSI 2s. Geez, we've got probably 4 or 5 dozen of them at our place. But they're in-yard fingertip access to full animal history. So it's worth about $7K. And people are putting a tender on it, so they've got the bits of paper up there. I put my bid in for $3,400. It's just a shame the reserve's $3,500. But I encourage you to go up there, see all the suppliers, and thanks to the Gallagher guys who have come up and come along and made that donation. It's worth mentioning, Ian said that I've done a few of these adventures, but we've got a farm in the Wairarapa as well. We've got about 350,000 stock units over there, and it's pretty good. A B is a stock unit, isn't it, Dan? A bit? No. Okay, all right. Well, let's not worry about that then. So carrying on, so the sponsors and others have given a whole lot of goodies, and you've got your supply or your goodie bags with some supplies and so on in there. I hope you've all collected that. On your seats too, you might have mentioned or you might have seen a few post-it notes. Now keep those handy, because before we go to lunch, you're going to need those post-it notes. And I think Wilkins Farming have put in a pen into the goodie bags as well. So if you haven't got a pen handy in your pocket or something, well, there'll be one in your goodie bag that you'll be able to use shortly. Okay, smoking, a couple of other things. If you need to go and have a durry, first go and see a doctor. That's probably the first message. But there's no smoking inside. Even if you're from down from Gisborne, the boys from down there, even the natural kind of dope and stuff, there's none of that here inside. So outside, if you're wanting to go for a smoke, toilets, the wharepaku, it's you go out this way and then you go down some steps and around the corner, and you'll find your way into the bathrooms there. Coincidentally, the ones for the gents, you've got to walk past the kegs of beer to get there. So I don't know, you think about what you like. Should there be an earthquake, so we'll hear the fire drill, standard thing. Drop, cover, hold, get under the chairs however you can for the earthquake. We just need to keep an eye out for the venue staff, so we'll just be directed by them. Should there be a tsunami, I'm told the evacuation area for an earthquake is just outside here. For a tsunami, though, it's up by a memorial, which is about 2 miles up the road. So I hope you got your running shoes on. But we'll just be directed by the staff should that happen. Wi-Fi code. Oh, what else have we got here? So it's not just all of you here in the room that are participating in the sessions. We've got about as many as are here that are at home that have registered, plus perhaps others who sign up throughout the couple of days who are watching online. And so they've tuned in, and as we go through, they may have questions as well. And for those people who are watching, actually it's worth mentioning, let's say hello and welcome all those who are viewing from online. So when I say 1, 2, 3, on 3, let's say good morning. So 1, 2, 3. All right, so all of you that are at home watching, if you have any questions, just like the rest of you, we've got the hashtag here through Twitter, through YouTube and so on. What is it? NZDearConf19. So that we might hear from them as we go through as well. The second thing, conference spaces, Wi-Fi. Some of you might be wondering about that. And so we've got 2 different sets of Wi-Fi that we can keep in mind. If you choose to, I think you can maybe take a picture of that, or we'll have them up on screens around the places as well, on posters that you can make use of. What else have we got here? Presentation materials. So some of the presenters will be providing some of their materials. We'll have that up online within a week, and we'll let you know when that's happening. In terms of smoking, we've got that. You know, one of the cool themes about the theme of the conference around reflections and directions is that when we kind of look into the future, the unknown space, we need to take forward the best of our past, but we need to make sure that we embrace all of these changes that are happening around us. And in the sessions and through the AGM with the DFA and so on, these sorts of themes came up too. So the phrase I quite like is that if you don't like change, you'll like irrelevance even less. And so as we hear from some of these presenters, let's understand how can we choose some deliberate responses to what's going on rather than feeling like change is being done just to us. So I think let's keep that in mind. What else? I think we've done pretty well for that so far. Just in terms of use of mobiles and things like that, let's try and keep them on silent. And I think if I catch you out using that, let's put something in the kitty for a good cause. So every time we choose to fine one another, let's call that $5, and I think we should donate that at the end of the conference to the Rural Support Trust. So if I can see anyone using a cell phone as we go through. Oh, Justin, I see you're using yours at the moment. So I think, Justin, that's first $5 from you. How have we gone for timing, by the way?
You're over time.
Okay, yeah, thought you might say that. So just before we go any further, one of the things when we think about directions, it's, you know, how clear are we, or what's our ability to make choices as we move into the future, you know, that we're around direction. So I thought, well, this is one little story I always found interesting that I'll just share with you. So Ian mentioned this fencing business. So we were doing stockyards and kiwi fruit around the Bay of Plenty. But then I got the request from a buddy of mine to get involved in some rowing, and he said, look, I need you to help with a race, Jamie. I need you to sort of team up with this other fella. And I said, well, what's the race? And he said, well, it starts in Africa and it ends in Barbados. And so I thought, well, this will be quite a long way, and 5,000 kilometres, and I didn't know how long it was going to take. And he said it's about 6 weeks long it would take, and I had no idea who the other joker was in the boat. And it turns out he was quite different from me. So he was about 13 years older than me, and he still is. And anyway, so I said, look, what's this race going to be like? And he didn't really know too much about it, but I did some research. And most people do research online, right? And so I thought, well, let's find out a few quick things about this race. And I promise you, this relates to the conference theme as well. So I jumped online and I found out about these two guys from the UK. They were best mates. And mid-ocean, this is the race before ours. Mid-ocean, one of these guys turned to his buddy and he said, about your wife and I. They didn't finish the race together. One was having an affair with the other's wife. Next one, I read about a husband and wife that had rowed the ocean together. So I see Gay and Tom are here, so this is the next adventure for the two of you. But here we go. We can think about, what can we do? And midway across the ocean, this husband, the husband said to the wife, I've got a phobia of the sea. And so he had to get rescued. And the wife carried on solo, did the race on her own, and it was her completing it that inspired my rowing buddy to do our campaign. And the next one, this may sound like a joke, but I promise you it's true. So there was a Frenchman and an Englishman rowing across the ocean. Midway across, one saw a tattoo on the other guy's ankle, and he said, where did you get the tattoo? And the guy said, oh, well, I got it when I was inside. So this is when one realises he's rowing with a convicted murderer who's doing the race as some sort of life rehab. And this last one, though, this is the reason why I'm sharing this story with you. So when you row across an ocean, when you're trying to achieve this big goal of getting to the finish line, you need to figure out a couple of things. And the first one is, what direction do you row? And the next one is, how much rowing do you do? So there's two of you in the boat, and most often you row 2 hours on, 2 hours off. So when I'm rowing, you sleep, and when you row, I sleep. So every minute of the day, someone rows. The next question, though, is what way do you row? Because from the start line, from your point of view, you can go straight west to the finish in Barbados, shortest distance. Or alternatively, from the start line, you go south and you curve around. You row further, but with the currents, you definitely row faster. So you row south. Anyway, so this last one, this was what happened in our race. And a week into it, these guys were rowing, two big guys from the UK, and one of them came out of the cabin after his sleep, and he said to the other joker, how far have you gone? How's it been going? And the guy said, I hate it. I want to quit. And the guy said, why? I don't understand. He said, look, we built this boat. We raised all the money. It's all been tough and things. I'm rowing as fast as I can. I've had a guts full. The other guy said, we've only been doing it a week. The whole thing's going to take about 6 weeks, and we knew that. What's the big deal? And the guy said, look, every 24 hours or so, a signal goes from our crew up to the headquarters of the race, and it tells us where we are in the fleet. I'm rowing as fast as I can west in my shift, but we're horrible. We're out the back door. They're a week into the race. And this other guy finally says, which way did you say you're rowing? So they, a week into the race, realised they're literally rowing in different directions. One's west, south, 2 hours on, 2 hours off, 2 hours. They've been doing it for a week. So they had this huge argument, huge argument. You'd think there'd be some simple ways of figuring it out, like paper, scissors, rock, or, go southwest. That's a compromise, right? But they didn't do any of that. What do you think they did? Yeah, they just carried on doing it. One of these guys said, you're an idiot. I'm going to go west still. The other guy said, well, you're dumb too. I'm going to carry on going south. So for another whole week, west, south, west, south, west, south. Now, of the 19 crews that competed in the race, those guys did not do very well. The only crew that I know that they were faster than was a mother and son combination who had the time of their lives, and they celebrated sunset with gin and tonics. Yeah? So that was the plan. So the moral of the story is, we can dig it in, we work hard, we put all this effort in, day out, and that's what you're doing around the country. But if we're here to talk about reflections and directions, yeah, let's focus on when we've been at our best. Let's share lots of stories and have some fun over the next couple of days. But how can we ensure that we're sort of fundamentally, as an industry, heading in the same direction? How can we align around that to help the industry and each of you be the best that you can be? So with that, that's enough housekeeping from me. We're going to have a great couple of days. There's going to be a bit of interaction, but we'll worry about that later. So why don't we kick off, though, with a bit of a state of the nation. So I'm going to ask Dan and Ian to come on up just to give their perspective to set the scene for the next couple of days. Cheers.
Thanks very much, Jamie. Reflections and directions, it tells you a bit, doesn't it? With that little talk. It's my pleasure to present a report, a summary report of our activities over the last year, and it's going to be helped by Dan Coop, who probably needs no introduction to any of you, as the Chief Executive of Deer Industry New Zealand. So to crack on, I've got somewhere here that there's here it is. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to head off and first with a few reflections in terms of what's happened with the industry. And in terms of discussing with Dan how this was going to, how we're going to do this, he came up with this idea that maybe it should be like a school report card. So, which sounded quite complicated to me, but anyway, I think Dan will be the best person to be able to take us through that.
Thanks, Ian. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming. I hope you have a good couple of days and come back next year as well. So, report card. Yeah, I sort of showed some of my staff about the report card already, and they said they were having flashbacks to their younger days, and they weren't very positive flashbacks. So, hopefully, nobody else has that kind of experience. But what I wanted to do was kind of go through. I mean, I think everyone in the room will probably be feeling that we've had a pretty good year in the deer industry, and I think we have. But what I want to do is try and unpick, how much of that is about the hard work and the progress we've made towards our objectives, and how much of it has been, a bit of good fortune from other things going on in the world. So let's go through, and the way we'll try and mark it is by looking at our industry strategy. Now, some of you guys might know what that is, but for those who don't, we've got 4 strategic objectives. We want it to be a confident and growing deer industry, and I think the reality is we are. But let's have a look at those strategic objectives below that and see how we've got on. So first one there is premium positioning. So we want consumers to want to pay more for our products, and we'll look at both venison and velvet for that. Second one is market diversification. Again, we've got objectives to diversify our markets around both venison and velvet. Sustainably growing on-farm value, so there's 2 parts of that. We need to be sustainable first, and then we need to grow the value we produce on-farm, so we'll look at the 2 parts of that equation. And then finally, cohesive and respected. So cohesive is about that, we actually all feel connected and as a team in the deer industry, and then respected is what do other people in the world think of us as a deer industry. So let's go through those 8 things basically, and Ian's told me I'm a hard marker. But we'll see what you guys think. I think deer farmers want us to be hard markers. We'll see. So, number 1, premium positioning. What's the most obvious premium product we sell that we can measure as a deer industry? Is chilled venison, right? Chilled venison fetches quite a lot more in the market than frozen venison does. So what does this chart tell us? Is actually that by both volume and percentage, well actually that's value not volume, but by percentage and actual value, the amount of chilled venison's gone down in the last season. So that's not a good headline for premium positioning of venison. The backstory to that is why did that happen? The answer is that because our venison market has held up the schedule for much later in the season than they usually do, and farmers responded to that price signal. They were able to hold up the schedule because they found new premium niches for both frozen retail product and also pet food had a really big impact on the shape of the schedule, and that premium pet foods became very, very hot last season, and that contributed quite strongly to how much we got paid as an industry. So, the headline's not great, It's also hard to really fail us on this when you've got paid the best venison prices you've ever been paid. That's a factor. And the other thing I'd just like to note is that in behind here we have actually taken a step up in terms of the standards we impose around Savannah venison as well, with the exclusion of GM feeds and requirement for on-farm quality assurance. So I think that's going to position us well for selling a more premium product in the future. So overall, I'm going to give it just a pass mark. I'm going to give it a B-. Velvet, premium positioning. I won't go into a lot of detail because I'll steal Reese's thunder. He's going to talk to you quite a lot about this kind of stuff. Again, pretty good prices. Nobody's complaining about the premium nature of the price. Reese is also going to show you some evidence that, based on looking at Korean consumers, they actually answer surveys and say they prefer our product. They consider it a premium product over competing countries' products. So we're going to give him a good solid A. Reese, well done. It's not all about Reese. Market diversification. So you guys have seen this chart before. We've had a nice steady progression. I mean, the issue for the industry is while we love our customers in the Eurozone and in Germany and the Benelux, actually we've had too many eggs in that basket, and we've been trying to diversify away from over-reliance on Euro trade. So if you look at this chart, the last 12 months, this is to March this year, actually says that Eurozone trade has increased. So headline again is actually not that great in terms of our objectives. The reason for that growth has come at the expense of other Europe, so non-Euro Europe. And actually the major story in there is that the UK have shot their currency in the foot quite badly. So our trade to the UK has fallen quite substantially. On the positive side of the ledger, that little purple line at the top, which is other markets, so not North America, not Europe, has actually grown it's about 100% growth there. So that's great news. And the headline there is about some venison trade actually into China, which has grown really substantially. So that's been an objective for the industry and for some companies, and they're succeeding there. So again, how do we mark that? Well, it's a mixed bag, but I'm going to give it a pass overall. Next one. Diversifying our velvet markets. This chart we put up 2 years ago in this very same room, and probably, so the dotted line kind of shows where we were. This breaks down the bottom, the red is our traditional Oriental medicine market in Korea. The green stuff is healthy foods. Yellow stuff is consumption in China, and the blue stuff is, all other markets. So we were forecasting some quite substantial growth in healthy foods and in China consumption. We can now look back and say, well, how's that actually gone? If I push firmly. So the dark lines kind of show where things have actually landed up, mapped onto that old chart. And you can see that it's kind of not been too far out of line, but in actual fact, the volumes that our marketers have had to deal with have been more than we forecast. The bottom red line has shrunk, so that traditional market for Oriental medicine has shrunk more quickly than what we expected. The healthy food sector has grown more quickly than we expected, and the other two are kind of as we'd predicted. So that's pretty good in terms of diversifying away from that really traditional market. I guess if I'm to be a hard marker, as I am, we need that blue line to grow, right? So we've got a heck of a lot of eggs in China and Korea as markets, and we need to be spreading them a bit further. So definitely a pass, but we've got must work harder is what's written on the bottom of that card. The next one, so this is where it gets a bit soft, and I haven't got so many good charts for you guys, but sustainably, part of sustainably growing on-farm value. So how the heck do we measure sustainably? What does it actually mean? Well, we're going to talk about that over the next couple of days, I think. But for me, there's some elements in it which include how do we care for people, how do we care for our animals, and how do we care for the environment. So in terms of people stuff, I guess the industry hasn't been dreadfully active, but the DFA did a great program around succession planning over this last year and had really good buy-in from the families who got involved. So I think there were about 180 people attended those workshops and really enjoyed them. Animal welfare, so we've got some standards. They've kind of pretty much fixed, and we continue to monitor them closely, and people continue to comply to a really high standard, to existing standards. So that's nice. Environment is what's really hot at the moment. So we put together this concept called Deer Industry Environment Groups. Phil in the corner of the room is running those, and we had a really good response to putting that concept out there. So we thought we might get a couple of groups. We've got 12 groups in the either formed or in the process of forming, and there's more on the horizon, I hope, Phil. Finally, the thing we can measure, we did a quick survey of how many people have farm environment plans. So this is our strategy for how we get on board the environmental care bus. And 40% of the people who replied to the survey said yes, they have a farm environment plan, which kind of sounds good and seemed quite positive, until we consider that actually, we've got a stated target of having 100% of people with farm environment plans by the end of next year. So, the issue is, at that rate, we're not going to get there. So that's, this is why I'm giving it a C. This is must work harder for sure. The other part of this equation, so the growing on-farm value bit, spectacular really is the only word for this. So if you look at this chart and the last couple of markings on the chart, last year we've increased the average carcass weight by about 1.5 kilos per animal. Multiply that by 300,000 animals killed at $10 a kilo. So that productivity in terms of getting better growth out of animals has added nearly $5 million to farmers' bottom line just in the last year. And that's on top of a couple of earlier years of good growth on that metric as well. So that's pretty spectacular. The other thing we've got data for is reproductive efficiency. So I wouldn't place my life on these numbers, but this is the agricultural census, this is the Stats NZ figures. So all you do is divide what farmers report as being the fawns born by what farmers reported as being the hinds mated in the previous season, and you get a reproductive efficiency figure. That has jumped in this last set of stats figures from 77 up to 84%. If you believe that, that is astonishing. Now, I'll just take it with a grain of salt, but it's the only data we've got. And what's that, mate?
I said you've got to. It's up there.
It's up there. So you got it. It must be true. Yeah. So pretty hard not to give that an A+. So I think the farmers in the room, well, and the ones not in the room, need to be congratulated that actually on farm you guys have done some amazing work this year. So again, 7% of our 450,000 hinds mated. That you can turn that into a dollar figure pretty quick, and it's quite a big dollar figure. So well done. Next one, cohesive and respected. So let's look at the cohesive part. So that's about us feeling like the deer industry is a team, and we stick together and we look after each other. Again, bloody hard to measure, but the things that we can see are how many people are involved in advanced parties, for instance, and that continues to be about the 30 advanced parties worth, and the people who are there continue to enjoy them and participate in them. They've started getting a bit innovative in how they run those advanced parties, and particularly trying to create linkages between their own one and ones in other parts of the country with exchanges. There's been some North Island, South Island exchanges, which are very enjoyable apparently. And the other thing I'd mention is that the DFA's program around next generation and trying to get young people together in a room and talking to each other has also continued to be really successful and worked really well and been oversubscribed quite heavily. And I guess the bit that the DFA guys have been challenging themselves with probably yesterday is that the branch network is under pressure for participation and trying to get people to step up into leadership, but I know they're working really hard on that challenge, and they're going to take it head on. So overall, there's some good stuff, but there's not a heck of a lot of growth and good stuff there, so we'll give it a good solid B-. Other side of this equation, the cohesive and respected. What do you guys think? I guess the thing boils down to who do we want to be respected by? And when we were imagining this objective, one of the things that I was a bit paranoid about was that we be respected by other parts of the rural sector. So I didn't want you guys to have to walk into a pub and just mumble, I'm a deer farmer, because it was quite embarrassing and you felt a bit fringe, like, say, an alpaca farmer. Sorry if there's any alpaca farmers in the room, no offence intended, but it is a bit lunatic. So respected by the rural sector. So we did a little survey last year of we tacked a little survey onto an omnibus thing for sheep and beef farmers, and actually 86% of sheep and beef farmers, if you ask them about deer farming, the first thing they say is actually quite a positive thing. So they say something good, which is great. So now you guys can actually walk into the pub and say quite loudly you're a deer farmer and be proud of it. So that was important to us. Who's the second set of constituents is the people who buy our products. You know, we actually want them to understand who you are and respect what you do. Again, you know, Reese will talk a bit more. We've done quite a lot of market research in our velvet markets, and you know, the feeling from those consumers towards New Zealand generally is very positive. But probably there is a bit of a weakness about respecting that you guys are professional and expert farmers, and that's something we need to work on. And finally, and I won't spend a lot of time on it, but I mean, how are you feeling in terms of you know, the regulatory environment at the moment, and whether farming in general and deer farming in particular is getting a lot of respect from our, you know, our voting public and their elected politicians and their employed officials. And I think, you know, we're going to debate it a bit, I'm sure, but I feel like, you know, the industry probably hasn't done enough work to get the respect of those people, and they can have a pretty important impact on our livelihoods. So, so overall, I'm giving it a C. Sorry. So where does that bring your final mark for the year? Did you pass School C? Actually, don't tell me. It's not important. The final arbiters, the main judges are you guys, right? So, well, the farmers. So what we've got on this chart is, you know, the last roughly 15 years of farmers voting with their feet in the deer industry, right? So they were saying, actually, the deer industry is not doing good enough, and we're going to go and do something else with our land. The last couple of years, down the end of that chart, what you can see is an increase in breeding hinds, an increase in total deer. So I think, you know, my view is that farmers have given us a pass mark, and they're actually saying the industry's somewhere we want to be, which is fantastic. So good solid year for the industry. B, there you go. So I'll have some arguments with you guys about that later.
Okay, thanks, Dan. Do you agree with me? I wouldn't. Did he miss his vocation? Should he have been a teacher? I'm pleased he wasn't mine. I don't like those some of those harsh markings. But I think it's overall, and I guess if you apply that university thinking, C's a pass and D's a fail, and believe you me, I know what a C is. So, so the second part of the conference is the direction that we're heading in, and that's really important. But firstly, where are we going to get this? Forward. Here we go. So if we pull all those grades together that Dan's that we've used there, and there's a variety of performance, and I think it's quite a good way of actually giving us a look at some of the overall strategy we've been working to, and what's going well and what's got room to work on. And I think that there's two areas there that where the C is, which I've just referred to, and that's pretty important to me, the C. Firstly, in sustainability of the industry, and secondly, the respected part of the industry, which Dan's just been talking about. So it's actually not a bad scorecard, but it creates the opportunity for us to have aspirations to work even harder. So I'll just talk for a few minutes about the sustainability part of it, and we've already talked just touched on that, and the important thing there is we're talking about sustainability in terms of the environment, and in terms of the animals, and in terms of the people, and it's really important that we consider those three areas. And it means different things to different people. But the first one, as far as I'm concerned, is about economic sustainability. So from a farming perspective, there's no embarrassment in making a profit. It's a business. We've got to make sure that the returns are there for the farmers. And there's been some, and you've seen some good pictures of what's happening with the pricing. So from a venison point of view and from the velvet point of view, that's been going pretty good. But when you start thinking about other things as well, and particularly the environment and people, we've got to be thinking about investing in those areas. And there's a saying that says you've got to be in the black before you can be in the green. And I think that's probably a reality. So if we can make money on farms, and we've had a good year this year, we can be investing in other things. The other thing is we've got to make sure we are doing the right things, and the right things to care for the environment, and certainly involving with the and the people. What's important to the customers and also to our communities, and how do we know what the right thing is in the eyes of them? And that one of the real challenges with using that, doing the right thing, it's a moving target and it's a moving feast. What's acceptable one day is not acceptable the next. And I think we can put some perspective in that. Put some perspective of that, and if you think about the things, if you're going on a holiday and you saw that in front of you, you would think that wouldn't be acceptable to us today. And there's probably some people here with families from 5 and 6 and 7. They're all backed in the back of the HQ Holden, and there was no such thing as seatbelts. We don't accept that today. The standards are changing, and yet there's plenty of examples you can think about. The alcohol laws and what we used to do once upon a time, and now we're a lot more responsible in terms of our associations with drinking and that sort of thing. So what's acceptable one day is not acceptable the next, and so we need to know what are the acceptable things. What are those behaviours? Our industry has gained quite a tradition for being above and beyond, and doing the right thing. And if we think about the environmental issues, Sir Peter Elworthy, what a visionary he was in terms of starting that environmental award back, I think, about 2004. So we've certainly been conscious of the environmental ramifications, and even going back and see Tom Williams here to the Farm Assurance Plan, which was created back in the mid-90s, and there was even an environmental component with that. So we've been quite proactive in getting those sort of things underway. And remember, in the late 90s, there was a land care manual which was put together, which has been reviewed several times, and the latest one being released about 12 months ago. So those standards are changing all the time, and I guess one of the things that we can challenge with Jamie is to say, what are the right things? What do we need to be doing to recalibrate and go above and beyond as we have done in the past? So there's one of the challenges we have. Dan, would you like to do the next one?
Yeah. So just quickly, because we're over time already, but the other C was for respected, right? And I mean, hopefully people in the room can agree with this. But if you haven't got the respect of the voting public and their politicians, then you're going to pay the price for that. And I think the pastoral sector is currently in that position. If you think about regulation that's coming our way around environmental stuff, including both water quality and climate change, and there'll be more. There'll be more in the next year or so. So how do you get respect? You guys would probably like for us to just march down to the beehive and demand respect. That's not how respect works. You earn it, you don't demand it. So what have we got to do? Those examples, like being ahead of our time on environmental awards or farm environment planning, we're not ahead of our time anymore. The world's moved on and we haven't moved quickly enough. So to get respect, we're going to have to earn it by doing stuff that people think is the right thing to do, and then making sure that the important people that we need respect from understand that we're doing it. So put the two together, sustainable and respected. and this is a bit of a challenge for you guys. This is just to fire you up a bit because it's probably going to sound like a whole lot of Wellington shiny bum speak, but this is where we think we should be aspiring for, that we're sustainable and respected, and we're in a situation where you can't run a political campaign that's targeting the deer industry because people understand and respect us as being good guys and girls. So we're innovative and successful as an industry, but we also do the right things in terms of those values that society has about people and animals and the environment. So we're doing the right things, and we're invulnerable to attack. Similarly, from our customers, if people are feeling worried about the climate impact or the environmental impact of something they eat, they go, oh no, well, I'm not worried about that with this venison because I know those guys and they're good guys and they are successful and innovative and they do the right things, and we understand that. So that's where we want to be. So this is the little challenge, the little aspiration that Jamie's probably going to tease out and see whether you guys think is realistic and achievable. But the deer industry we are people, and we're recognised as people who always look to do the right thing. We know what the right thing is. It's a moving target, but we always look to do the right thing. We're respected and accepted by our communities. They like us, they think we're good guys, and they might even want to get involved because they think we're such good people. Yeah. So talent and help and assistance. And then finally, our customers understand that we're good people and we do the right thing, and they want to be associated with our products. Not just eating them, they like eating them, not because they taste good, but because they want to be associated with what we are. So that's the little challenge, guys. And the big question is how? Well, first question is, do you agree with that aspiration? The second question is how? And I don't know the answer, but that's why we employed Jamie. So good luck, Jamie. We'll see how that goes over the next couple of days. Cheers, guys.
No, that's fantastic. Thanks, Ian. Thanks, Dan. I thought that was brilliant, using the old scorecard kind of setup. I had a bit of a look as we went through, and there was a combination of, the B minuses. I think it went from a C up to an A plus. So that's a pretty good combination. And what we're going to be doing over the next little while is maybe hearing what your scores are as well. We won't do it just yet, but in a little while you can see the bits of paper up on the wall over here. So before we go to lunch, I'm going to be asking you to give your mark for those same 4 pillars that Dan took us through. Okay, the other thing I quite like from what you were saying, Ian, is you've got to be in the black before you can get into the green. As we go through the next couple of days, the concept of how do we create great value, whether it's through environment, economics and so on, the concept of how do we get back to that great value has to be at the forefront. So that's going to be good. All right, let's, without diving into that too much further, we do have another perspective when we think reflection and then direction. We've got a very special speaker who can come up with us next. And I think Melissa might help me with the little banner here too. But I do have the privilege of inviting Hamish up from Rabobank to give us a presentation from Rabobank's perspective, but also what he's seeing out there in the economic environment. So let me just give a little bit of a perspective. So Hamish was brought up on a sheep, beef and mixed cropping farm in South Canterbury, and he started his career in agribusiness banking in 1993. Now we talked about reflection, so I looked at 1993. And what was happening in 1993? Let's have a look at that. So first thing I saw, Bill Clinton became president, making him the 3rd youngest and first baby boomer to hold office, along with a few other things he went on to do. The Mutton Birds were awarded the best album of the year. And in terms of movies being released, we had The Piano and Jurassic Park. So many of you might remember that. Okay, so back to Hamish. He heads up the middle market food and agribusiness for Rabobank, as I said, encompassing companies, maybe with turnover ranging from 10 million up to 300 million, but he's a busy guy. He's been with Rabobank since 98, taking up his current position as head of business in 2016, so we'll hear about that. He's got a ton of qualifications. I'm not going to go into those because there was just a truck of them. But he also enjoys hunting, fishing, mountain biking and surfing. He's sponsored by Rabobank, so they have made it possible for him to come along. He's here to share his thoughts on the rural New Zealand and financial outlook. Let's give him a round of applause.
Growing a better world takes courage. It takes foresight and vision. It's about dreaming big, then being brave enough to follow that dream through. To create a world where food is plentiful, soils are healthy, and rivers run crystal clear. A world where we grow more with less, where livestock is tended to with care. Energy is friend, not foe, and waste is a valuable resource. This is the world you're already shaping through imagination, innovation, and determination. So as small steps become huge leaps, you move boldly forward. And Rabobank is there beside you to help grow a better world together.
Thanks, Jamie. Look, that was a video we put together for a conference we ran in Cockatoo Island in Sydney a couple of weeks ago. There was about 1,300 farmers, mainly from Australia, at that conference. It was a fantastic event. Actually, Grant and Ali Ludeman, who are speaking here tomorrow, spoke at that conference as well. But look, it's my pleasure to be here from Rabobank. Thank you, Jamie, for the introduction. Just like to acknowledge Dan Coop, the CEO, and Ian Walker, Chairman. Welcome delegates, both here in the room and who are tuning in online. I'd also just like to acknowledge my colleagues, Byron Taylor and Tom Abernathy from Rabobank, who will be here for the next couple of days. So just in terms of a bit further introduction about myself, I went to Lincoln, but part of my pre-Lincoln work, I worked as a musterer on Richmond Station up in the Mackenzie country, and they had quite a big deer operation there back in the early 80s, and about 50% of the deer on that property were straight off the helicopter out of the West Coast bush and Rakaia. There wasn't any crushes or anything in the yard, so it was pretty challenging Wild West days come to weaning and velveting and so forth. So I do have a bit of experience with that, and also with a bit of hunting as well. Look, we've been associated with this conference for the last 19 years. We really like the deer industry for reasons that have just been talked about here this morning by Dan and Ian. We're very happy to continue our association here, and I think the diversity that deer farming offers into the New Zealand agricultural sector is really important and exciting. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the New Zealand agricultural debt market. I'm not going to talk a lot about the deer market because there'll be a lot of that discussion over the next couple of days anyway, but I will look at the 5 forces that are influencing protein, the protein industry in general, and so therefore the deer market as well. And I'm really going to dig into the brand and reputation and social license to operate, which really aligns with the discussions or the scores of C that you've put up there today. So that's good. And if I've got time at the end, I'll talk about a little bit about greenhouse gas and the implications and opportunities for farmers. So just before I do that, a little bit about Rabobank. We were formed as a farmers cooperative in Holland about 125 years ago, at a time when there was a lot of famine and starvation in Netherlands and across Europe. And so basically the villagers who had money in Holland pulled those funds together, lent that money out to the farmers surrounding those villages, and that allowed them to plant crops, potatoes and so forth, and famine was averted. And so we've grown our business up over the last 125 years to now become one of the largest banks in the world. We're still a fully owned cooperative bank, and we're certainly the largest food and agribusiness bank in the world. In terms of New Zealand, we came into New Zealand in 1994 with the purchase of Primary Industry Bank of Australia, and later with the purchase of Rights and Farmers Finance in 1998, and we've just continued to grow our our book organically from there. We've got a bit over $12 billion in limits lent out to New Zealand farmers, and that gives us about a 17% market share. Our vision globally is to grow a better world together, and we can say that with hand on heart because we are a cooperative. We retain all of our profits here in New Zealand to help us grow our business here. We don't pay dividends to anyone. So just a few comments about the New Zealand agri-debt market. I just want to point out some, well, we're sitting there at about $63 billion lent to the whole agribusiness market at the moment. So that's on the left-hand axis here. I started banking in Alexandra, as Jamie said, in 1993 when there was about $8 billion of debt. So I just want to point out a few of the milestones or key points on this graph. The blue line here is the compound annual growth rate, and that's on the right-hand axis here. So quite strong growth in the early 90s, but off a very low base. And then we saw this drop here, which was twofold. It was mainly the Asian financial crisis, but we also had the East Coast drought in New Zealand agriculture, and that lasted sort of 2.5 seasons. And a lot of you that would have been farming, particularly up Hawke's Bay and East Coast, would remember that time. It was pretty tough going. Then we saw the formation of Fonterra, the lifting of the moratorium on dairy processing, and that great migration of North Island dairy farmers down south to Canterbury and Southland particularly, and that change of land use from dry land sheep and beef and cropping into dairy. So we saw that strong growth, plus or minus 15% compound growth through till the cliff that is the global financial crisis. So we actually went into negative growth at that point, so under zero. Incidentally, Rabobank in that year had our record year of lending. We lent $1.1 billion of new money to New Zealand agriculture, and I think that's again just a reconfirmation that we do look through cycles. We short-term iterations or problems on commodity prices or exchange rate don't worry us as long as we have a long-term view that things are okay. We'll continue to lend, so we don't pull out and rush back in. This bit of growth here is probably a negative sentiment through the 14-15. That was the dairy downturn, where dairy farmers effectively lost money for 2 seasons in a row. Banks propped them up to the extent of about $3 billion, or just under $2 per kg of milk solids. And then we've seen that recovery here, and we're sitting just at about 3 plus or minus 3% at the moment. And that last little blip is probably caused as much as anything else by increased lending into the horticultural sector, particularly kiwi fruit. So the kiwi fruit industry needs about $3 billion over the next 5 years to meet consumer growth. So it's a really good story. Zespri are releasing 750 hectares of license per year. That's just been tendered in the last few weeks, and the average price for the license was $290,000 per hectare. So that's just a ticket to the game before you bought the land or built the infrastructure or planted the plant. So, but it's a positive story because it's a consumer pull. So Zespri are very confident they've got the market for that product. Just in terms, I won't dwell on this, but just in terms of where that debt sits, the blue bars are the rise of the dairy debt. So currently sitting at $41 billion. 41 billion, sheep and beef about 14. So the dairy debt is, some of that is in here and some is in other up here, and then that's that horticultural debt there, which is sort of got a lot bigger than what it was there. So it's not only been a dairy story, is the other point I'd make. Sheep and beef debt has gone from 5 billion to 14, so it's trebled in size, and at the same time the sheep and beef, or sheep numbers particularly, have reduced. So it's not just a dairy story in terms of that debt growth. In terms of dairy debt, it's very difficult for us to get those numbers because the Reserve Bank don't aggregate those numbers, but we believe there's about $350 to $400 million lent to the dairy industry, so that's under 1% of that total $61 billion of debt. The other reason it's very hard to get hold of those numbers, as was pointed out in this morning's presentation, a lot of dairy farming is integrated into other farming industries, sheep and beef, and so it just becomes very difficult to assess that debt. So I'm now just going to look at some of the influences of protein from Rabobank's perspective. I'm going to concentrate on the 2 in orange there, number 3 and 5. So that really sort of lines up with what Dan and Ian have been talking about this morning in terms of the C passes. But it's worth just mentioning the other factors. Rabobank called out the African swine fever as a potential issue over 12 months ago. We said then that between 5 and 30% of the African pig population could be affected, and effectively it kills those pigs. The latest estimation there is it's going to be between 25 and 35% of the Chinese pork production is going to be die and not be there. So to put that in perspective, that's more than the total pork production of the USA. So it's a major issue. Consequently, it does ironically create a really good opportunity for protein out of New Zealand, particularly sheep meat and beef. But as you've seen there, the China market is opening up for venison as well. So there is a really good opportunity there. I guess we need to be careful with what we wish for, though, because to put that in the New Zealand African swine fever for China into New Zealand's perspective, that's like foot and mouth hitting our country. So feel sorry for the Chinese, but they are going to be looking for protein and not necessarily pork protein to replace what they've lost. Trade wars and other trade issues. Well, you've only got to open the newspaper or listen to the radio in the last week. Obviously, trade wars between China and USA really heated up a few months ago. Then they calmed down as they were around the negotiation table, but that's fallen off the cliff this week on Monday, Tuesday, and now we've already seen the tit-for-tat tariffs being imposed. And whilst that doesn't necessarily affect New Zealand is a small exporting focused nation of agricultural products, and at times we can become collateral damage to what the big boys are doing in the sandpit. So it's just something that we always need to be aware of. Consumer preferences are being shaped by 3 trends, and this really does sort of fit in with what Ian and Dan were talking about. So they're really looking for that authenticity, the convenience, and the trust. So the authenticity and the trust are really what we're talking about the industry. Is the consumer in America, Europe, or China, can they look at what they're buying in terms of that venison or the velvet and look through a transparent supply chain back inside the farm gate and say, hey, I feel really good about buying this. I like the story that I'm hearing, and this is really good. And same on the trust side, and then down to the bottom one, the social license to operate. It's just again looking at that health of human health, planet health, financial health. It's everything. So again, lining up with what Dan and Ian have talked about. I'm not going to talk about technology at all, but look, we've got the Gallagher guys here. There's so many exciting things happening in technology that are going to really improve productivity, reduce cost over the next 10 and 20 years, and I just think we'll see that ramp up. So look, overall, I think we're in a really good space in terms of New Zealand agriculture now. New Zealand interest rates are as low as they've ever been. Exchange rates dropped off its highs out of the 80s into the mid 60s. We're predicting a dairy payout next year of $7.15 as an opening figure. Sheep guys are making more than they've ever made. Beef continues to do well. Talked about kiwi fruit. Those guys are really making money at the moment. We've seen big development into avocados. The apple industry's increasing, and we've heard about the dairy industry. Coming off the highs of $11 per kg, but but sitting at $9 a kg, so still well above 5-year averages, and velvet production's increased, but all that velvet's been sold and averaging $125 a kilo, that sort of thing. So look, from a Rabobank perspective, we're in a bit of a purple patch, because it's not always this good, and it's certainly not always this good across all sectors, so we're very happy. Just before I dive into the other stuff, I'm not going to dwell on this because it's largely been covered this morning, but we do see New Zealand deer farming as a niche success story. We really like what we're seeing through the passion for profit improvements through carcass weight, fawning percentages, and the other things mentioned this morning. It is a diversified land use, that's not dairy or something else, and I think that's good from a public perception point of view. Really high utilisation of the carcass, and we feel it has got a lower impact on the land. So whilst you give yourself a C pass, I think you're well on the way to having a good public perception. But it's good to see you still working on it, because I agree that things don't stand still, and if you stand still, you find yourself at the back of the pack again. So look, from a summary point of view, deer farming does really hit that authenticity, convenience, and trust, and so it's just a matter of building from that. You're not starting from a poor place. You're starting from a good place and growing from there. I'm now just going to dive into some of that sort of social license to operate. And so this first one talks about is talking about water quality. So it's talking about E. coli, not nitrates and so forth. So it's E. coli. The photo on the right there is just a grab off Google, and it's just an example of the amount of public pressure that's coming from all sorts of places from the urbanites or society in general for us as a country to clean up our act. The graph is what I want to talk about, and that's so the targets for swimmable rivers is to reach 90% swimmable rivers by 2040. That graph represents where the little black lines represent. The little black lines represent where each region is at the moment. So there's only 3 regions that are currently meeting the grade, and that's the Upper South Island and West Coast, and that's sort of solution by dilution in terms of the West Coast point of view. But I haven't got time to talk about the whole graph, but I'm going to draw your attention to two others. You've got Canterbury there that's sitting at 80%, so you think, well, that's not too bad. We've got 20 years to sort out 10%. That's not too hard. And then you look at Taranaki, which looks pretty terrible, at just above 40%. But in terms of Canterbury, it's a vast geographical area, and most of that geographical area sits in the Southern Alps, where there's little or no farming taking place. The unswimmable rivers are all on the intensively farmed Canterbury Plains, and there is a lot of work to do there, because a lot of those cow farms are running 4+ cows per hectare. There's virtually no fencing because there's centre pivots covering it all and that sort of thing. So a lot of work to do there. Whereas you look at Taranaki, it's a much smaller geographical area. They are more intensively farmed with dairy, other than besides other industries. But they have actually done a lot of work voluntarily over the last 10 or more years in terms of fencing, riparian strips, and planting. So we would expect to see. That this line in Taranaki moving up. So it's up to each community to do their own thing to meet those targets. And as I say, I'm only putting that up there as an example of some of the social pressures that are taking place. Just to use the same analogy by region in terms of what is it going to cost to meet those 2040 targets. You can see there the grey areas is sheep and beef. The black areas down the bottom is dairy, so very, very low cost for dairy, and deer farming in the little one at the top there. Reason for dairy being so low is that 95% of dairy waterways are already fenced, and they generally fence with 1 or 2 wire electric. So much more extensive farming in sheep and beef and deer, and far more expensive, obviously, to put up a conventional sheep fence or even an electric deer fence to exclude stock out of waterways. So a lot of that, a lot of these targets will be borne by the sheep and beef deer industries, other than dairy. I'm now just going to, another sort of point of social licence to operate. There is, it's no surprise that there is a trend for more vegetarianism, veganism, that sort of thing. A lot of that has been sort of spread in the past through social media, so through Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all that sort of thing. So it's people sharing their views on that. What I've got up here at the moment is a report by the Lancet Institute. Now, they're a very credible global scientific organisation that look at things around human health, food health, and animal health, all of that sort of thing. They've come up with a recommendation of what the future human diet should look like, and it's a little bit scary in the sense that, well, no surprise that it's fruit and vegetable dominated, and then you've got legumes and other grains and all that sort of thing over there. And then I'll draw your attention to this red slither here, which is protein, and then that's further broken down up here into beef, lamb and pork, and then fish, eggs and poultry. So very their recommendation is very small, and then I'll just put that into perspective in this graph at the bottom here. What they're recommending in terms of red meat, the current consumption is 55 grams of protein per person per day. They're recommending 13 grams per person per day. So to put that in perspective, if you walk into the restaurant tonight and order your 300 gram fillet steak with vegetables, then that's the only, and you're meeting these recommendations, that's the last protein you're going to eat for the next 23 days. So now we don't imagine that's ever going to come to pass, and certainly not going to come to pass in a country like New Zealand. But what the message here is that there's social pressure, there's now scientific pressure. So as an industry, and in this case in the deer industry, it's about getting the story right. It's about getting that authenticity, the transparency, all of that sort of thing right, because New Zealand can only feed 30, some people say 40 million people. That's all we're capable of producing. The global population is heading for 9.5 billion. So we don't see this stuff as a problem. What we do see as a problem is if the story is not right and it's not authentic. Venison's a great product. Velvet's a great medicinal and OTC over-the-counter health product. Those stories, you've already got the story right. It's a matter of managing that story and looking after it, telling that story well. You can't control social media, but you can certainly feed information into social media. It's no use, rebutting stuff that's going out there. It's just about telling that story, but making sure that story is authentic and true. So that's the future of our business. Certainly the future of the dairy industry. Deer industry. Just to illustrate that in a bit more detail, this is a study out of Wageningen University in Holland about the Dutch consumer buying patterns for traditional versus sustainably produced meat. So going back only as far as 2011, there was about €3.5 billion spent on traditional produced meat, and a very small amount, a couple of €100 million spent on sustainably produced meat. So that's meat that has that story and transparency that the consumer can trust. It dribbled along there until about 2014, and it's really ramped up to it's almost neck and neck in 2017. I imagine when we get the figures for 2018 out of Wageningen, they'll be neck and neck, or sustainably produced meat will overtake traditional meat. So again, you can't, to sell sustainable meat, you've got to have the story that backs it up. And so that's the main message there. So just a little bit about brand and reputation. It starts at the country level, and the current government, a previous government, Trade and Enterprise, Border Security, all that sort of thing, work very hard to protect our country reputation and brand. So we're sitting right up in very good company very good company there with a AAA rating. Only Singapore and can't even see who the other one is. Singapore and Switzerland are ahead of us. So that's a good place to be. And again, we're in a good space as an exporting nation to achieve that. But I just point out that some things the wheels can wobble, and I point to the honey industry. It's the darling of the agricultural output. It's sort of quite new in terms of the manuka production over the last few years, but there were stories abounding 2 or 3 years ago that was 5 times the amount of New Zealand manuka honey being sold in China than what was actually being produced here. So that whole authenticity and trust in the supply chain fell out the window, and therefore consumers start pulling back from that. I think the honey values have dropped recently, but now you've got an industry that's got to rebuild that trust and build that respect. So again, from a dairy industry point of view, you've got a great reputation. I'd say just look after it, hold on to it, because you don't want to start from the bottom of the pile again and try and rebuild that, and as a consequence be selling commodities. I won't dwell on this because time's ticking on, but it's just consumers don't know what's journalism and what's rumour. They don't know what's a recognised source. There's so many channels for news now that people can just post anything and call it true, and if some people, a certain percentage of the population that read it will believe it. I'm just going to talk a little bit about greenhouse gas, and I know that you've got Mark Adams from Beef and Lamb going to talk about some of this either this afternoon or tomorrow, so I'm not going to dwell on it, but I will talk a bit about the afforestation opportunities. So New Zealand is unique in terms of our greenhouse gas output. In terms of about 50% of the total greenhouse gases in New Zealand come from agriculture, the rest from industry and more particularly energy. So that's very unique. Other countries, the greenhouse gas output from agriculture is a tiny percentage of their total outputs. Of the agriculture outputs, 50% are dairy, and the balance is sheep, beef and deer and other. Dairy, incidentally, was 23% of total agricultural outputs in 1990, but because of the increase in that industry, that's gone up to 50%. Interesting again to note that the sheep and beef industry's greenhouse gases have dropped by 30% since 1990, and whilst maintaining that production, which I mentioned at the outset. So that's a really positive sign that things can happen. In terms of the way that we're going to meet our reduction targets, it's through continuation of that productivity gains. Reducing stocking rates in some cases, reducing nitrogen inputs into farms, and other practices that lower emissions, and other technologies that are either being developed or are yet to be developed. So I'm just going to leave that at that, because I think you'll get that covered in more detail further on in the conference. So just looking at the afforestation opportunities. So we've had the opportunity to farm carbon since 2008. When it first launched, carbon units in New Zealand were worth about $17. They quickly rose to about $22 and then fell off the cliff when the legislation changed, which allowed emitters to purchase units from anywhere around the world. So we suddenly had emitters buying units from Kazakhstan and other places, and so the value dropped out a bit to about $1 or $2. The legislation changed in 2016, and we've seen it steadily grow back up to the cap at $25 now. So there is a really good opportunity to farm for carbon. It's likely that cap may be lifted up to $30 at some stage in the future. That'll be a governmental decision. Just in terms of, so the carbon farming is one side, and under the current Billion Tree program, there is also government grants, which are pretty healthy in terms of exotic. Sorry, I keep pushing the wrong button. In terms of exotics, they're at $1,500 per hectare, and for indigenous up to $4,000 per hectare. So and then on top of that, you've got other grants available for erosion control, fencing control, and so forth. So you've got carbon and grants to help establishment. I guess personally, what I'd like to see, and I think I speak on behalf of the bank, is I was in Gisborne in the 90s when whole communities sort of shut down, schools shut down because the whole, farm after farm was being bought and planted in forestry. I think what we'd like to see here through this scheme is portions of farms being planted into forestry, so integrating forestry into the farming operation rather than seeing trees growing through the sheep yards and so forth. The other piece of legislation that's been really good that's just come into act through the Climate Change Response Act is the averaging of carbon. So before you could sell carbons on the way through a 30-year production cycle of a Pinus radiata forest, but when you came to harvest you'd have to buy those credits back down to the safe level, replant, and then sell the credits again. Obviously, if you were selling credits here for $5 and buying them back at $25, that wasn't a very financially sustainable model. So with the averaging now, you're allowed to sell after 6 years for Pinus radiata, you can sell credits up to the midway point of the rotation. So in this example, the rotation's 28 years, about 800 tonnes or just under 800 tonnes of carbon total, so you can sell 475 tonnes of carbon without any liability to rebuy at harvest, as long as that forest is replanted back so it becomes a perpetual forest. So now that's got, obviously it's a one generation wonder, so you only get that cash flow from one generation. You can't go on and sell them again up here on this side. So it does offer some succession planning opportunities, cash flow for this generation to help the next generation into a farm. The next generation are going to have to rely more on the timber value of that product. So it's got pluses and minuses, but it is at least an opportunity. So look, I'm going to finish up in a minute, but it's just really a matter of doing your homework, seeing how, talking to your professionals, talk to us as a bank about how the grants, the carbon farming would fit into your normal farming operation, and whether that's something that you want to do, whether it's exotic forest or indigenous forest. Obviously, there's positives and negatives. I think that photo is just, these photos just grabbed off Google again, but I think that's Taufri Parai, or just north of Tolaga, post that big flood last year when all that slash came down and basically swamped the whole flats around Tolaga Bay and the beaches and so forth. I don't personally believe that would happen again. There's so much more regulation in terms of harvest now, in terms of keeping slash out of waterways, securing skid sites of slash post-harvest. Most of that stuff there was harvested 5 years ago, and it's just been a disaster sitting there waiting to happen. So obviously the positive aspects are shade, erosion control, and just aesthetics. So ETS does provide landowners with some opportunities, and I'm not saying that this is a lay down misere. There's still a lot of consultation to go through the zero carbon bill over the next few months, and there is going to be challenges in terms of meeting that 10% reduction on methane by 2030. But all we're saying here is to look at the opportunities as well, because it's not all bad news. There is that government help there in terms of grants to help planting, and so you just got to work out what's best for your industry. So just in closing, the market is moving. That's the most important thing, so we can't bury our heads in the sand. We've got to see where this legislation comes out. If you've got submissions, I'd work through the beef and lamb guys who are working hard on this as well. But once things come into legislation, we've got to see what we've ended up with and then work with that. It isn't all bad news, and the first step is to make an informed decision on that planning. So that's it from me. Thank you very much. Thanks, James.
That's fantastic. Thanks very much, Hamish. certainly your reflections in the first part of the presentation, and then lots of mental barocca for everyone to think about for the future. And I suspect there's lots of questions, or it's going to provoke a fair bit of discussion. And you may be inundated with a couple of questions. Are you going to be able to stick around for a little bit? Yeah, great. Can we just ask one more round of applause for Hamish, please? I thought that was a pretty flash video at the beginning, actually, too, so I wasn't quite, if anyone else saw it the same as me, there must have been some pretty cool sheepdogs to have helped make the little together thing in the paddock at the end there. Anyway, so it's almost time for a bite to eat, but what we've done for the last 90 minutes or so is, from Ian and Dan, they gave us a bit of a report card, and then we've heard a bit of information from Hamish about, whereabouts are we, and now before we go out for a bite to eat, I think it's just a good opportunity for you to give your opinion as well. So, and for everyone back at home who's looking through the website and so on. So, what it would be great is just before we shoot up to have a bite to eat, is in front of you or in your hand, you might have seen these post-it notes. And what I'm going to ask you to do is just to have a very, very quick look at these post-it notes, because before we can get to direction of the conference, let's just all have a little think about the reflection part. So that's what we're going to do just for a couple of minutes, and then we'll all wander up for a bite to eat. So here's how it's going to work. There are a couple of questions that I'm just going to ask you, and this is for you to talk just with the person sitting next to you. It's only going to take a couple of minutes, and I want you to use your pen and those post-it notes. So here's how it works. So 2 questions. First of all, let's look back at the last 12 months. So just share very quickly, probably for a minute or two, just what a highlight was for you on your farm or in your business, and then maybe if there was an insight from that. Perhaps the more pressing thing that I'm going to ask from you, though, is around this 4 pillars, these 4 themes that Dan and Ian talked us through. And so what's the score that you'd give them? Now you can see that we're going to look at afterwards. You're going to leave your post-it notes just on the seat in front of you. But I'm going to ask you to think about all 4 of them and give them a score out of 10. So instead of a B- or C or A+, out of 10, 1 being rubbish and we've done nothing, and 10 being absolutely world class, I'd like you to have a think about each of those. Now it's a little bit complicated, so I needed to put a few instructions on the screen. So 1's rubbish, 5's okay, 10's world class. You can choose to 1 decimal place. Okay, you can choose to 1 decimal place, but not 2 decimal places. Write your number on the post-it note. If you need a pen, there's the Wilkins one inside your goodie bags. Nice little name drop of one of the suppliers, right? Next one. Okay, which post-it note for which of the 4 pillars? So you got coloured post-it notes. So this is an important instruction that you need to keep in mind. So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes now just to think about it, and then I'll instruct us when we can go up for a bite to eat. But talk to someone about, what stood out for you for the last 12 months, and then have a pretty honest conversation with the person sitting next to you about what is the score that you would give each of those 4 pillars. I know that Dan split them into 8. Let's just think about them as 4. And afterwards, I'll just ask that you leave your the number on the seats in front with you. You may choose to add a little comment to the post-it note. That's up to you. But what we want is the number. Okay, I'm going to give you a few minutes now. Away you go.